So, we are recording. Cool. Homework was due last night. Did anybody have any issues submitting or anything like that? Everything makes sense. I'll get to grading those very, very soon here. Pretty much everybody in your section actually got it submitted, so good job. The Discord ping wasn't necessarily for you. My afternoon class did not necessarily get all of them in, so we have some requirements to talk about today. And plan for today is we have the rest of these slides to get through. I'm going to do a little bit of group work at the end, and I'm going to guess that'll probably be it. And then next time we'll start talking about the different types of UML models that we can develop as systems analysts and requirements engineers. So we left off with talking about product champions. We went over before, I don't want to go to slide 2 yet. We're talking about conflicts, figuring out who our users are, basically going through the elicitation process of requirements, right? So figuring out exactly which requirements we need. So we talked about conflicts. We had some definitely good discussions on what kind of conflicts you can expect to develop as requirements engineers. And then we started talking about product champions. Now, again, these are people who are essentially championing the project, which is a horrible way to define something, obviously, right? Don't use the name in the definition. But you're the interface between the customer. Now, keep in mind, and the one thing that I kind of want to stress here is that champions are not always technical people, right? They're not the technical expert. They're probably going to be management of some kind, whether it's project management or above. And my question for you to kick the class off is that what kind of issues do you think we could see with product champions being a part of this process? Right, so I'm going to pop it over here to Slido now. And I'm kind of curious what you think here, because you are probably going to be the technical expert. You're going to have customers who may or may not be technical. You're going to have product managers. You'll have, if you're not the systems analyst, you'll have one there. You may have your user base, a representative set of people, and our champions. And again, these people are representing the user's interest. I'm kind of curious what you think having a champion could bring to your project in terms of issues. And if this question doesn't make sense, let me know in chat. But I'm kind of hoping to get you thinking along the lines of an engineer, basically. I'm just scrolling through Discord to make sure that everything's set up for a little bit from now. Too many requests from the customer, slowing down the project. I find the delay between Slido and Streamlabs and Discord it's kind of funny because the Twitch chat seems to be like really laggy. This one is very bursty. And then Discord's real time. It's kind of fun to try and manage all of these talking points. All right, too many requests. Their own oh, I like this one. So their own interest could override the interest of the user with miscommunication. Absolutely, that's a great idea or a great point there, because you are imparting your own viewpoints on that. So yeah, that's a great way to have unclear requirements. Unrealistic expectations, another level where requirements could be distorted. Unrealistic. I'm seeing lots of commonalities here. Unrealistic. So distorting requirements, promising too much. Ooh, bypass project manager. Different ideal product. So yeah, absolutely. These are all things to consider. Now, is a product champion necessary for a project? Generally, the argument is yes. Even with all of these issues that you're coming up with here, it's probably good to have that outside viewpoint. And hopefully you get a product champion who is not miscommunicating the customer's requirements, right? Hopefully, they are on the same page. As you're bringing up here, it might not always be the case. But again, these are all things to keep in the back of your mind when you're developing requirements. Absolutely. So these are all perfect answers, honestly. Yep. Good stuff. So you're all thinking about this. That's great. Alrighty. So product champions. These are people, again, that you're going to have to identify as part of your requirement specification. So if you remember way back to like, I think 2 classes ago, I gave you a snippet of what the SRS looks like at an outline level. Product champion is one of those fields that are in there. So who is attached to this requirement spec? So after we've gone through elicitation, we have analyzed everything, meaning that we've gone through the requirements and we've basically made sure that they made sense. And we've gone through the process of writing them down in an SRS. We're going to end up with all of these different fields. Right, so these low-level requirements are basically everything we've been talking about, right? So the interfaces, the functionals, the non-functionals, this is the low-level nitty-gritty side of things. System features, this is, again, a little bit higher level. What are the features of the system, right? What are the different aspects that have to be delivered? We may have user classifications, and again, we talked about this, right? Figuring out who is going to be using the product, and making sure that it meets their needs. And again, that's where your champion hopefully comes into play as well. And there are a lot more fields as well, right? This is a massive, massive document. So that was more to summarize what it is. Now we actually have to go through and validate it. Validation has different meanings depending on which phase of the software lifecycle you are in. Later on, I'll talk about validation in terms of testing. Right, so we write unit tests, integration tests, that's part of validation. When we talk about validating requirements, we're basically testing the language that we wrote. So does it actually define the system? Does it actually define what the customer wants and what they intend? Right, so do they have any hidden meanings that maybe you didn't understand? So this is where you're probably going to have some back and forth with your customer again. So things that we care about during validation. Are requirements correct? Right? And when we say correct, that has a very formal meaning. Are they going to be exactly representative of what you're looking for? Correctness in mathematics has like a formal proof behind it, basically. We have a little bit of flexibility since it's natural language, obviously, but correct should be, it's not a superfluous term. They should be consistent, right? So the language should be the same throughout. We should have very clear meanings between all of our requirements, and we have basically consistency. I'm sure that you have all worked on term projects before at this point, and one person has written the intro, one person has written the background, one person's written the approach, or whatever you have, and you may have different styles of writing. And if you're not all on the same page, that document's very jarring to read. So that's kind of what we're getting at with consistency. And then all of the rest of these, this is basically all the points that we've been talking about, right? Requirements should be exceedingly clear. There should be no ambiguity in the writing, right? I shouldn't, as a developer, have to guess what this particular requirement means. If I do, then that's a target for refinement. That's a target for fixing it. They should be complete. We should be able to describe each feature that was laid out at the top of the document with a set of requirements, right? There should be no feature that has nothing tied to it. There should be no black holes in your document, basically, right? And this is all, again, hopefully common sense. But as I spell it out, you realize there's kind of a mental checklist you have to go through. Feasible and relevant, right? So we shouldn't be shooting for the moon with our programs. We should actually be developing things that we can actually write. So that's feasible. Not only that, but it's also, is it feasible for the users? Is it feasible that people are actually going to be using this project? So not only is it technically feasible, but is it, I suppose, market feasible or customer feasible, right? So depending on your terms of feasibility, that's where things are going to come into play here. And then lastly, testable and traceable. again, each requirement, whether it's functional or non-functional, should be able to have a test written for it, right? We talked about non-functionals in terms of being the fluffy requirements or the quality requirements. I should really stop saying fluffy. That's my cynicism popping through. But we should be able to test what each of those means, right? Have we succeeded with our implementation? And then traceable, this actually ties with testability. Can we link these requirements to test cases? Can we link them to our features, to our different maybe UML diagrams or design decisions? Or basically, can we take this requirement and link it everywhere? And I'll talk about linking towards the end of these slides. But this is actually going to show you where you may or may not have problems in your project too. So traceability, very underrated, but very, very important. So how do we do this? I can sit here and tell you all day that this is how you should do it, and then you go and write your own requirements back and you forget half of them, right? Well, naturally, we have a set of techniques for performing validation. And there are multiple ways of going about doing this. We can do reviews. So we can get our team together, formally or informally, depending on the structure and whether it is like a formal part of your configuration management process. Let's get together and let's read through each section and make sure everything makes sense. Or today we're going to talk about this particular feature. Here's all the requirements associated with it. Are they all clear, concise, unambiguous, testable, etc., etc., etc.? Right. So the informal ones are basically kind of your check. Yes, we're good. The formal means you're passing through your formal software engineering process, and we can move on to, design, or we can move on to implementation. We might also do some prototyping, right? So depending on your software process model, we may be developing our requirements alongside a prototype or a sprint or a release, right? So requirement reviews can be baked into your release if necessary. You could be going the test-driven development route. This is kind of a new and exciting, new in air brackets, or air quotes. Uh, this is where you're basically writing tests, and your tests inform your requirements development, right? So you're writing your program, you're writing tests that are associated with it, you're going to link it to a requirement, and this whole process is basically going to be test-driven. So we may be designing test cases along with it, whether it's functional test cases, whether it's user acceptance tests, whether it's system tests, right? So depending on what you're looking for and what your process is, this validation, I don't want to say technique or process again, this path, I suppose, or this process of validation can be done at multiple steps. The thing to keep in mind is that it has to be done at some point. Right? You can't just write requirements and then be done. You have to make sure everything works out okay. And I've been tossing these two terms around a little bit. So validation and verification. This is colloquially known as V and V. If you have done any programming work at all, you might have been asked to do some V and V activities. Validation and verification. These are basically two sides of the same coin. Again, validation is more testing, verification is more formal proofing in a way. So validation checks you're building the right thing. Verification checks that you're building that thing right, so that thing correctly. Effectively, what you can almost consider this as validation, we're testing real world stuff. Verification, we're going a more mathematical approach. We are maybe running simulations. We are checking all of the internal logic of our models, of our requirements. So depending on the importance your company puts on one or both of these, it's trying to figure out where I'm going with this. For instance, when I was working, I mainly did validation. Verification was an entirely different department. It just kind of depends on what your infrastructure is, whether you'll be doing both or one or none or something like that. All right. So I gave you a preview earlier of management of requirements, right? And we talked about the requirements development process, the requirements management process. I showed you all of those boxes of defining and verifying requirements and things of that nature. requirements management is, again, very similar to configuration management. Validation is basically looking for the test to do. Yeah, our requirements are seeking validation. Yeah, basically validation is going to be writing your unit tests, writing your integration tests, things of that nature. Validation in terms of requirements is going to be reviews and maybe test cases you would write for them. When I say testing in terms of like unit tests, in terms of verifying models, we're a little bit farther down the line, so I might be jumping ahead of myself with that. Awesome. Isn't got it the oh no, that's the seems good emote. I was gonna say that is that a double? But yeah, that seems good. All right. So with requirements management, again, I keep telling you that there is some kind of a shadowy, nebulous tool behind the scenes or putting things into. Um, this is basically a tool, and there are multiple tools out there. Some of them are paid, some of them are free. Same with anything. We're going to have change control, version control, tracing, tracking. So this type of tool that you'd be putting your requirements in has all of these capabilities. And I realized that I closed my image that I had out there. Let me pull one up really, really quickly here. Yeah, this might be a good one. It's always fun to do a live Google image search with safe search off. That's never a problem. All right, how do we open image in new tab? There we go. So this is one that, sorry, it's a little bit blurry. This is something called Doors. So this is an older system. Not a lot of places that use Agile really use Doors anymore. It's more of like a Jira or an Atlassian tool. But here, this is basically a requirements management tool where here we have our various sections. So users shall be able to operate brakes in standard footwear. Users, blah, blah, blah. Users shall have minimum daylight visibility within the vehicle. And then we can specify lots of different things, but basically every one of these requirements, every one of these headings is a separate field. We have values attached to them, what type of data this is, which tests is it linked to, which design decisions is it linked to. So if you go into an environment and you use Doors, I will say I feel sorry for you. It's a very interesting tool to work with, and I use interesting as my get out of jail free term for no opinion on good or bad, but it does its job, which is the goal. But again, this would be a type of tool like this where everything is entered as an object. It's not just prose, it's not just natural language. We have weight behind everything in here. And by doing that, I seem to have lost my full screen ability here. There we go. Okay, so we'll have a tool like that. You don't have to worry about that in this class, luckily. You have similar things in GitHub if you want to start playing with that. I'm not making it a requirement, but they have a lot of these config management tools on the back end. Basically, like if you go to that projects tab that you might see in there, we have some of this kind of thing. So in terms of change control, why is this useful? And again, change control is having a way to update our requirements with a formal process behind it. One reason, this is a great way to manage scope creep. Now, I'm sure you all are aware of scope, right? So this is the boundaries of our project. We're not going to go above and beyond it. Creep is where we start adding on features, a little bit here, a little bit there, a little bit there. And I'm seeing this in some of your write-ups. So I did a quick peruse at your proposals, and some of you are going to go way above and beyond the confines of the class, which is a good goal, but I'll give you feedback saying maybe you need to trim this a little bit, right? So what you should be shooting for is an attainable project. And I'm saying that both for your term projects and for a project in general. Scope creep is something that is very, very easy to see happening in any project, right? User A needs a particular feature, okay? Project management wants a new widget on the homepage. Got it. Sorry, I keep seeing things like flashing on my screen over here and thinking that it's new chats popping up, and it's really the thing that was said 10 minutes ago. But this is basically just something to watch out for. because you start investigating new technologies and new features and you think, oh, we can do a 5 minute, let's look at this thing. And then 3 hours later, you're still trying to bring that into your framework, right? So just be aware that there are ways to manage scope creep. Having your requirements be locked down is one of them. If your requirements are locked and you have a rigorous process to go through, it's hard to add these little bits and pieces that balloon a project's time and budget. So, for instance, if I want to add a new requirement or update one, I'm going to have to go through a change request process. So I have to notify the correct people that, hey, I need something to be changed in the requirement spec. I may have to do an impact analysis, meaning how long is this going to take? Are we going to have to go back and regenerate all of our test cases? What do we have to do to bring this new requirement into the system? Depending on how big of a change it is, you may have to go through a committee or a change control board or your project manager. It just depends on how invasive the change is. And then you have to go through your updates and make sure that you haven't impacted other requirements. And I'll probably talk about this later on. There's something called feature interaction, which is a big problem for projects where you have one thing you've worked on, one component, and then you have another one, and through some weird interaction, they impact each other. There's a great example where there was an older Ford vehicle, and this is an example from my old PhD advisor, which was I loved hearing about. You turn on the radio. No, it was you turn on the Yeah, it was you turn on the radio and the windshield wipers start moving. I think it was. Basically, one of these subsystems impacted another subsystem and the windshield wipers turned on. How did this happen? Well, they're all sending data to a shared communication bus, and the wiper module picked up a signal thinking it was for it. So this can actually be tied back to requirements where, hey, we need to talk on this communications bus. Maybe we forgot to add a identifier saying this is specifically for the radio instead of the windows. So adding new requirements can impact other systems. Or it could be, again, any of our other problems. Maybe it's ambiguous. Maybe it's not testable. So volatility could be any number of these things. But high level, let's manage your scope creep. We also have version control here. So you all have a sneak peek at version control with your last homework that you did, obviously with GitHub. And I love seeing all of your commit messages. I think my favorite one was, I'm really bad at this. Don't worry, you'll get better at it. But this is the same concept except for requirements. So we have a way to ID updates to our requirements, right? We can go back in time if we need to. We can assign access roles to our requirements changes. So me, the intern, can't go and update everything and just blow the project away, right? Or the flip side, upper management can't go in and start adding all of these requirements that are completely unachievable. So we have this nice kind of administrative side with a version control system. Again, whether it's Git, whether it's doors, I mean, whatever you want to use, this kind of a system is basically necessary. For requirements, we have a little bit of a different view of what a status is, though, right? So in GitHub, you have a commit. You might have to do a pull request if you have a bug or you want to add a new feature, right? So we have kind of a limited notion of what change is. For requirements, we might want to add a little bit more detail. All right, so I'm proposing a new requirement. This could be like doing a pull request where I need a new feature or I need a bug fix, right? Well, somebody's going to go in and either approve or deny it. And then we may implement it where we add the requirement or we do our update. And then we may have to verify it, right? So go through that verification stage where we have our reviews, we have our test-driven development, again, whichever process you're using. It might have to be deleted. So we have a tracking that this requirement was taken out. Well, if we delete something, we still have to make sure that our features are taken care of, right? Kind of what I'm trying to get to with all this little hand waving at the camera is that all of these links between requirements and features and tests, since it's so intertwined, any change you make can almost have like a butterfly effect throughout the whole system. So this verification and validation process is just so important. And again, we can reject changes as well. Let's manage our scope creep. Let's manage our project. Okay, and then last but not least for the set of slides before we go into a little bit of group work is tracing or traceability. This is an area that I am really personally interested in. And if you talk about it, honestly, if you talk about software engineering, I'm sure your eyes already have started glossing over today. But this is where we actually can put the pieces together for our project. So think of everything we've talked about so far. And again, everything's been kind of high level. Requirements is the deepest we've gone, but our various source code modules, our test cases, our user tests, our integration tests, our various levels of requirements, our UML models. I'm not sure if I'm repeating myself now or not, but they all can be tied together, right? And we're going to link them together in something called a traceability matrix. Now, sounds a little bit more exciting than it is, and I know you're thinking, oh my God, it's so exciting, can't wait to see it. It's basically just a way of showing what is linked to what. Here we have a 2D view of it. In reality, this would be like a 10D web in a way. But here we're just looking at test cases and requirements. So for instance, here in this type of picture, and again, apologize for the blurriness, but I wanted to really have it take up the whole page here. On our top, we have requirement identifiers. All right, so here is a list of a snapshot or a subset of all of our requirements. They all have an ID with them, so we don't have to write out the whole darn thing. You know, in this type of field, we can just say, oh, this is requirement one. Well, what's one? Let's go back to our config management tool for requirements and then go to ID one. So it's pretty easy linkage here. And this would be baked into one of your tools that you have as well. This is not like something extra that you have to go out and do. So let's look at requirement one. Here's a list of all of our test cases on this axis, right? And I say axis, this is obviously just a spreadsheet type of thing going on here. But requirement one has test case 1 and test case 11 associated with it. Now, are these test cases enough to describe the entirety of this requirement? Possibly, possibly not. But the key thing here is that we have test cases associated with it. We would have our validation and verification phase for testing and requirements to make sure that these test cases cover everything for that requirement. But we don't have basically a blank slate here. Right, so what we're looking at in this type of figure is, are there any missing test cases, for instance? So here, there's actually not an example of a missing one in here, but let's take requirement 2 for an example. If there was no test case associated with this requirement, what do you think that means? So literal question to you in chat here. Test case 2, so this is not here, this green block is not here. What does this actually mean? And why am I so perturbed by that idea? Not tested. Is that a bad thing? He said with a smirk. Yes. Straight answer. I like it. If we have an untested requirement, we have no idea what it's doing, right? We have no idea if the feature was implemented correctly. We have no idea if it's even there in the system. So we have no notion of if it passes or not, right? And I will say this, I'm kind of harping on this idea, and I realize I'm sticking on this way too long. But if you have any holes in here, for instance, where you're not testing a requirement, and an auditor comes in, they're going to absolutely light you up in front of basically, your peers. So you can lose licenses, you can lose safety ratings. It can be a very, very bad thing, and that's why, again, I'm trying to really drive the point home that never have an untested requirement. Make sure that all of your code is tied to various requirements or tests or things of that nature, because if you have a view that looks like this, it's very easy to see where the problems are. And don't, like define dummy test cases to make it look like things pass. That's when you get into the is it the VW side of things where you define tests specifically to pass so that you can fool the environmentalists. Is it VW or Volvo? I think it was VW. So this is a matrix, basically a traceability matrix. And this is one view of it. So we don't necessarily have to do requirement to test case. That's one of the most, thanks, yeah, VW. Um, that's the more common one. But you could consider this to be any artifact in your system, depending on the view that you want to take. There's great next. Ooh, there's a Netflix documentary. Ooh, cool. I'll have to check that out. Um, Again, this could be your design decisions. And design decisions are a higher level. That's kind of the top of that software requirements spec where here are the decisions we're making that are informing how our requirements are defined, right? So we may have to tie a design decision to a requirement to a test case, or requirement to code check-in to test case to uh, maintenance activity, right? So this can be a very complicated matrix. Interestingly, you can make this adaptive as well. So perhaps for a particular product, let's say that we have uh, one particular release candidate, these test cases do not apply. So we have kind of a generic test case list here, or sorry, these are requirements. These requirements do not apply because that feature is not implemented. So do we have black holes here? Yes, but that's going to mean that we have to update our particular matrix for this product. I'm going a little bit off the rails on that one. I'm not saying have black holes here, but make sure that everything that is listed applies to the particular project that you're looking at. Okay, sorry, I forgot I had to talk about risk as well. And this is where I get to have fun looking up risk on Google Images. Any of you good at Risk of Rain 2? I am horrible at this. The first one I was pretty decent at, but the second one I can't get into it. I mean, I can get into it, I'm just awful at it. Okay, we have some risks here. So let me kind of pop all of these in. We may have problems that will reflect in our residual requirements that we have, right? So the customer, the users do not get involved enough, meaning that we don't know what their input is. You take that, and that means that the engineers are defining everything, which is great for the engineers, but then you might be building the system they don't want. You might have overlooked user classes where we have a group of users, excuse me, that are going to be using the product. However, we never considered them in development. So they can't actually use the thing until we push out a bug fix. Hey, I've got a real world example of this. Yes, pointing at the camera. Yesterday, I went out, hour minute 1, I bought Spelunky 2. I already love it, by the way. The keyboard didn't work. You 100% at Risk of Rain 2? Damn, good job. Sorry, that's impressive. Spelunky 2, you could not use it holding down the shift key. I am a keyboard player for most of my games, including Rocket League. I'm a keyboard person. But it seemed like they only play tested it with the controller. So the user class of the keyboard jockey was overlooked, and they pushed out a bug fix within minutes. But I was one of the people that was impacted, and I wasn't yelling on Reddit for a while about it, but it does happen. So make sure you check everybody that'll be using your project. Vague and ambiguous requirements, talked about this. This is a risk, right? We don't have clarity. We also have unprioritized requirements, meaning that we don't necessarily put the correct weight on something that we should be developing sooner rather than later. Scope creep, talked about this. Analysis paralysis, this is a term that I hate, a keyboard warrior. Hostility? Okay. Warrior is a unpermitted term. Or maybe it's keyboard, I'm not sure. I'm just looking at the chat here. So this is a term where you spend way too much time analyzing your requirements or analyzing modules or something of that nature, and you get paralyzed in doing that. This is one of those buzzwordy terms which drives me a little bit bonkers, but it's a great description. You spend so much time thinking it that you don't have any time left to implement. It's a real world problem. And then we have inadequate, insufficient, inadequate process relations here. So your change process is not good, your impact analysis is not good, your version control is not good, meaning that your requirements are probably going to be in a pretty rough state, right? If anybody can add a requirement, or if anybody can delete a requirement or request a change, this can be problematic. What is scope creep again? Okay, so AutoMod, you're doing a bad job. What is scope creep again? Was a blocked term for hostility. Wow, no hostility there. Scope creep is where we start adding in functionality and features, and you get a bloated, overwhelming project. So let's pick on, I don't have any particular group to pick on here, I suppose, but let's say you're making a video game, right? You're doing a roguelike. Well, you start out, you're going to do a little 2D map with some randomly generated enemies, randomly placed items, and your goal is to just, beat all the enemies, right? That is a very well-scoped project. You have one level and one goal. That's very, very attainable. And then you start talking in your weekly meetings, well, what if we added the ability to dive deeper into the dungeon? Like, let's add more levels. And when you start going down that route, it makes sense from a gameplay perspective, right? But that's a new feature you have to add on. Well, wouldn't it be cool if our dungeons were a little more randomly generated? Maybe you add some of those cool algorithms that you see floating around on the procedural generation subreddit for cellular automata, or the different trees or graph-based structures for digging out walls. And then you're like, well, if we've gone this far, maybe we should add a storyline and a grand quest for this person to go on. Like, okay, again, that makes sense. That's a great feature, but then you have to build in all that functionality, and you can see a project that you could probably do within a handful of weeks is now a whole year. So that's the notion of scope creep. I'm not necessarily saying it's a bad thing to have all those features that I talked about, especially if you have a big project team, for instance. But if you have a scope, you have a box that you're in, and you start expanding that, that is scope creep. That impacts your timing, your budget, your morale, all kinds of things. Oh, blocked because of the word creep. Okay. Yep. I assumed it was just reading between the lines and heard sarcasm in your voice or something. It's all about the lore, baby. Absolutely. No, it actually, I just saw it blocked creep. Is there a process to refine ambiguous requirements or entering a project to which you have little experience with? Like you're not really sure what the project will require, so you initially make vague requirements. Yeah, so that's called a refinement, right? And that's actually what you're actually talking about there is the process we've been kind of outlining, right? You initially get together and you define your high level kind of nebulous requirements. These are maybe your business rules or your use cases or something broad. And then you start delving down and refining them. So does that make sense, hopefully? So yes, if you have a little experience, that's where you bring everybody together and start hammering out requirements, right? I want feature X. I don't really know how to do it, but let's start pulling it apart and teasing what the requirements would be for that. So absolutely, there is a process for that. Honestly, that's a fairly standard thing. Okay, we have 10 minutes left, and what I would like you to do is a little in-class assignment. And this is another one where I have you pop into the Discord channel. So I've got, I deleted your rooms and recreated them. So S2 10 a.m. group 1 through 4, pick your favorite room. Make sure that whoever is going to be submitting to Blackboard knows all of your names. But again, just like a Word document with everybody's name on it. I have a pressing need for 4 requirements from your groups. Clean rooms, yes. So I need 2 functional and 2 non-functional goals or requirements, and I want you to specify which one are functional and non-functional. And I'm not going to read this, I'll leave it on the screen so you can read it, and I'm realizing that my camera here needs to go out of the way. So let's make me a tiny little man. There we go. Is feature X what Professor Newtonian means to create the part? That's, isn't it Element X? So here, I need you to come up with some requirements. I'm not going to read this text for you, but consider that I need you to build a web application for a online retailer for home improvement projects. I'm not going to call it any copyrighted or trademark names, but think of big box stores. So if you've ever had to go get hardware or a tool or anything. Was it feature? Okay, so I've given you some high-level text here. So just come up with two functional and two non-functional requirements for that, and we'll talk about some of them next time and see how well you did with those. I haven't created the Blackboard assignment yet, so I'm going to go do that right now, and it'll be in the requirements engineering folder. So does anybody have any questions on what I'm looking for here? Hey, groups have already started coalescing. Good job. And again, you don't have to be super detailed with this. This is a quick in-class assignment, so don't agonize for hours over this. Yes, that's okay. And Blackboard has frozen on me, so hopefully in class. What's going on here? Right, so this will be due tomorrow night. I hate Blackboard's assignment tool. I mean, if any of you have any questions, feel free to ping me in the Discord chat. I'm trying to create the assignment at the same time because I realized I didn't do that. So I'm kind of sporadically checking in. Other thing too, I guess, while you're all kind of working on this, I don't necessarily care which requirements you make or which ones you pick, just that you have the the type of requirement I'm looking for. So pick any features that you like that you want to talk about. Okay, so we have this. Oh. If any of you go into GUI design, make sure you minimize clicks, otherwise people get annoyed. Also, I can't sing. Okay, assignment should be up now. Yeah, and it's listed as individual, but again, just make sure everybody's group will be there. Yeah, sorry. or group 2. All right, we got 1 minute left in class, so start working on wrapping things up if you can. Oh, Simpsons wave. It's good stuff. All right, we should start wrapping up here. So go ahead and submit what you've got to Blackboard. It should be up there. Again, you don't have to go above and beyond, more of a thought exercise than anything. So hope you all had a good time. We will move on to some UML type stuff next time, and I will probably get you all a new assignment coming up soon. So enjoy your lovely rainy fall, and I'll see you on Friday. Bye, everybody.